We're back with our fifth socially distant studio visit for Hallwalls. It's a series we've been doing to check in on artists that we've worked with across the country over the years and see how they're doing and what they're doing in this weird pandemic moment. As I just explained to our artist today, it's kind of a pandemic diary. I didn't want to call it that because that sounds really grim, but as I go along and I'm talking to people on successive days, it turns a little bit into that because I want to know how people are doing and how things are on the ground where they live. And today we're talking to Joshua Reiman, multidisciplinary artist out in Portland, Maine. The image behind me is from an exhibition that Josh had at Hallwalls in 2012, a survey exhibition called Can't Stop Reiman. And the piece that my big fat head is blocking is called Boys in the Hood. That is Joseph Boys. It's a beautiful felted lowrider that's kind of jacked up on one side, which, you know, I never really move very effectively here to show. Anyways, my first question with everyone, Josh, is how are you? How are you doing? How is your family?
Yeah, we're doing okay. You know, we feel really fortunate to be in Maine and to have our health. You know, I think at this point, after the weeks of this, I think just everybody who has health is doing okay. You know.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You know, I haven't been to Portland yet, but when I think of Portland, Maine, I think of it as a progressive city. I think of it as a civic-minded place. I imagine it to be a place full of people that are good neighbors. Is all of that playing out as the way I would imagine it? Are people observing the right social distancing and the right quarantine guidelines where you are?
No, no.
No.
I mean, like, here we go. Here we are. Like, I think there's people who are definitely well aware of what needs to happen. Portland, Maine is one of those places where they welcome everybody. The city is known for welcoming. So just this August, you know, the city welcomed over 400 asylum seekers who had been bused from El Paso to here, from all over the continent of Africa, but mostly like from Congo and Sierra Leone. And there's a huge homeless population here. Because there's a lot of free services here. Portland has multiple homeless shelters, soup kitchens, you name it. So there's a huge homeless population here year round, and they're suffering tremendously during this time.
I'm surprised to hear you say that people aren't obeying social distancing. I see your wife, Addie, posting grocery store images where people seem to be far enough apart. Is it just a selective thing that's happening? Or
it depends where you're going. You know, they've shut down a lot of the parks, a lot of the trails, the beaches. You know, it's like our Addie and Oli went to a beach today, and they had gotten rid of 80% of their parking just because too many people were coming by. You know, we're fortunate to live in an area that has a lot of parks and recreation and woods and beaches and things like that. But, you know, they get overrun with people. And, you know, we're also in a state where there's a lot of people who are, you know, democratic minded or progressive in certain pockets. But in general, it's a very conservative state.
You're a professor at the Maine College of Art, and I imagine, like many schools, Mecca is closed physically, so you are, I presume, remote teaching at the moment?
Yeah, yeah. I was just thinking about it today. Well, this is my, I'd say, 10th or 11th video chat today, and I have 46 students that I have to be in touch with. I want to be in touch with, and video chat with. I have graduate and undergraduate students, and I have, since I'm the chair of a department, I have a bunch of faculty to keep track of, and I'm very keen on understanding everybody's predicament, and then various supervision over curriculum stuff, and my colleagues, etc. So it's quite complicated, and just like all art schools, I think just to be quite frank, there's so much talent and so much stuff that can happen remotely. I keep telling my students, I don't have expectations of you. My only expectations of you are the expectations that you have of yourself. And I think at this time we just have to dig deep, and also like try to learn what we're really good at and learn where we can expand. Some of that is, this pandemic is triggering various traumas that people have, and within the arts communities, doesn't have to be school, but just in general, it triggers a lot of emotion and other things that have happened to people in past lives, and or in current situations that make it worse. And so there has been some pushback, and just like all art schools, as you read in the Art News, Art Forum, whatever, people are petitioning for their money back, and they are, some of there's like social media smearing and things like that are, you would hope people are coming together, but the real truth of it is, even the president of the United States, unfortunately, who's the president of the United States, can smear people right and left during a pandemic as well. So it's generally, it brings out the best and worst in everyone.
I've been very anxious to talk to someone that's an art teacher, because all teachers are having to cope with this sort of weirdness of this. But in particular art, and in particular when you're teaching studio art, where, a lot of it is standing with a group of students in someone's studio, looking at something they've physically made, being in its presence, talking about its materiality in your presence, discussing its problems face to face. I mean, that must add what we're in now must add a real level of difficulty to that kind of teaching / learning.
Yeah, it can. I think it's a matter of perspective. So, like, if we're creative individuals, then we should be creative with whatever we've got. If we look at, I've been telling my students, like, some of the greatest paintings that Frida Kahlo made was when she was bedridden and in traction, and if you look at internment camp work, or trench art, if you look at artists who have had nothing, even if you look at like some of the first portable artwork, portable wealth, the Venus of Willendorf, somebody had to make a tool. Somebody had to pick up a rock and carve it and carry it around with them in a way that is special to them. You can make it something out of anything. So it's a matter of your perspective. And I like to think that we'll prevail, and we'll have compassion, empathy, and kindness. We got to stay positive right now. The world's going to change, and we have to accept it in our own terms. And as creative people, there'll always be art, and art will be a document of this time. Somebody will be making something meaningful during this time that becomes a touchstone for how we think and feel visually. So I feel like, in one way, it's a big negative. I don't want to create binaries here, but I think it's a place of it can be a place of strength too, and there can be love and all those things that we need right now invested in that. If that doesn't sound too cheesy.
No, not at all. I mean, springboarding from that sort of proactive sentiment, and in the context of, I presume that students are not able to access whatever studios they had on campus to make work. Have there been students that have surprised you in this moment and found proactive solutions to creating work within their interests that and within the, constraints of the moment? Have there been some nice surprises?
Yeah, well, I think we're working through it right now, and I'm really starting to see some great work already. I think everybody just has to get a footing, and some people, I have like I'm the head of the sculpture program here, and I have 14 students in the sculpture major, juniors and seniors. 13 of them lost their employment. One had a family member that died of coronavirus already. Another that has a relative or a brother that has it, and so and that's not even talking about the faculty and staff in the area that have been affected in certain ways. So, like it's very real that we all have to get footing. And the surprising part of it is like I'm teaching a video class, intro to video, and we switch gears. Okay, so the first assignment now is to make a COVID-19 response video, and they're all due today at 5 o'clock. And so, but the ones I've seen so far, it's fascinating, the perspectives, and it really is a document of our time. And these videos can live on forever in various, YouTube and Instagram, wherever. And some of them use like gaming, Animal Crossing, Call of Duty, whatever, to voice over, to make new mention of the disease, how you can interact with somebody in War of the Worlds or Minecraft and tell them about COVID-19 is fascinating. There's also the sense of like working with what you've got. One of the projects I've given is just making worlds. And I'm not sure, did you see Ryder Henry's work at the Mattress Factory?
And we showed it at Hallwalls.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Right. So I've used Ryder and he's somebody you'll talk to, but I've actually used his work as a point of inspiration to work with what you've got and do it really, really well, and create the scenario that's best for you. I've been encouraging people to act as they would prior to a pandemic by creating models, maquettes, the pitch, create renderings for public artworks or scalable works, installations that you dream of making and that you could pitch to somebody someday. So just as any public artist would take on the pitch or an RFP, like why not use that type of equation to create work right now? Create your dream piece that you can make someday.
I'm fascinated that you mentioned someone was using the video game Animal Crossing as a framework for making work, because that, I don't play it, but that is like probably the most chill video game out there, like what people play most to relax themselves because it's so benign. I'd be very fascinated to see what someone does with that. You mentioned that this, what'd you say? This was your 10th video meeting today or something. So and maybe it's an absurd question, but as this, do you have any studio time yourself? Are you able to work on anything right now?
Well, I've got a few things going on here. I don't know if you can see this right here. These pieces I'm working on, these models. I've got this, I can pull out a couple things here, but sorry, I've got this, this bronze bell I made that's getting this deer tail, and this cast iron deer antler. It's all going in there, and I'm making this bell that doesn't ring. It just kind of swooshes the tail and has this antler below it, and I'm sending it to a show in Japan that is supposed to open in this summer. And it's a fascinating perspective because they're still going on with the show. The show is supposed to be pieces that you can touch and interact with. And so I'm really curious how they're going to take that on. And so my original idea is still very, to me, it's relevant that like a bell that doesn't ring but makes sound, the interactive quality of something that's pretty silent. So I'm working on that. Um, I'm working on this film I think that you're aware of from the past, that I've been working on for a couple of years, about mortality and the oldest animals in the ocean. Um, I was supposed to be in British Columbia like 4 weeks ago diving. The film is animals that are in the ocean, so it's all, I learned scuba diving, and I got the camera equipment to be able to make an underwater film. And I was supposed to be in British Columbia in early March, and that obviously pushed back, got pushed back to May, and then obviously that's not happening. So,
Yeah.
and then I was supposed to be in Singapore in June, which is obviously not happening as well. Um, and I do hope to go to these places someday and continue to work on it. And I'm working with all these marine biologists and scientists on the film, and we're just, everything's on pause. But it's been quite remarkable to be in contact with these people in various locales, specifically Canada and Singapore right now, respectively, and like what they're going through, and if we'll be able to see each other in person, etc.
As I recall, most of the films you've done have been made over a long duration. So
Mhm.
um, this
Yeah.
is this is at least in line with that that process.
Yeah, I got I yeah, I've been applying for grants to do things. I was awarded the Maine Media Arts Fellowship for 2020. So which is like it's an award, it's like a cash award and a title, and that allowed me to plan these trips. And so just have, like, everything's on hold really, um, as we try to assess what world we'll live in after this.
Uh, in the way that you've asked students to create COVID response artworks, is there anything about, because your work, a lot of your springboards from historical details, historical moments. We're definitely in a moment right now that one would call historical. So I'm wondering if there's anything that has seeped into yourself from this current zeitgeist that might find its way into your work somehow, even in a underlying thematic way.
Yeah, I mean, thanks so much for these kind questions. I really appreciate it. Um, I, yeah, I mean, like, what it does is it heightens my awareness. I think that it's more about like presence of heart and mind, or being like aware of your situation. And so this artwork I'm making that's about mortality and animals that can live hundreds of years. These animals will still go on living whether we live or die, and it's just now more potent. Um, I think one of my mentors was Lowry Burgess, who just passed away this last year, and I worked with him at Carnegie Mellon. And he worked on an artwork called The Quiet Axis. He worked on it for 40 years, and he worked on it until his death. And the work continues after his death. He's built an ark that's going to be sent to the moon on SpaceX moon expedition, and that will happen probably 2 years from now, even at posthumously. I like to think of some of these works, some of these artists who are making work that is timeless. And this project that I'm currently working on, I believe, I mean, I'm not trying to put it in that same league, but to me, it just heightens my awareness of what timelessness is. Thinking about animals that can live hundreds of years, and our own mortality and how fragile that our ecosystems are. It makes me think it's more relevant now than it was when I thought of it. So I think that it's a matter of whether your artwork is for you, or whether or who's your audience, and how long works will last, and their meanings are, if they're much greater than you. Like, I'm not sure if you've familiar with the Katie Patterson's Future Library, but she's a Scottish artist. I interviewed her for Sculpture Magazine a while ago, and she's got this piece where she's planted trees in Norway for 100 years. They'll grow, and every year there'll be a different author that writes a book that nobody will read. And in 100 years, they'll the forest will be cut down, and all the books will be printed from those trees, and they'll be held in this library in Oslo. She sold prints, an edition of prints, 1,000 of these prints, and if you are the owner of one of these prints, then you have the rights to the 100 books, a copy of the 100 books. And so my wife and I purchased one of those, and we won't be alive, and neither will the artist, right? So, but the rights to them will be, and maybe our son, or if he has a child, or so we donate this to somebody, then somebody else will reap the benefits, just as we're reaping the benefits of art that's been around for a long time.
So it sounds like the moment is not changing the content of your work, but it's altering your perspective on how you think about it in a wider context.
Yeah, yeah, like, I don't know about you, but or anybody who would ever watch this, but I think, like, I'm not so into artwork that's selfish anymore. Like when I was a younger artist, I'd be really selfish in everything I did. All the moves I made were all selfish, and now I just feel like, I'm more interested in poetry, or things that last, or you know, seeing what time does. Like that kind of rapture that takes over my interests are things that have staying power, or that are selfless. And so my focus in general is, like, I'm not really trying to impress anybody. Like, I'm just interested in making something that that can start a dialogue, or that can have some sort of staying power for a group.
Well, speaking of time, at the
Mhm.
moment that we all return to whatever the next version of normal is, what what will be the thing that you can't do right now? What will be one of the first things you do that you can't do right now that you'd like to do?
Wow. Um, I'd like to make room for my son to be able to play with his friends, because as a child, it's really, seeing a child who can't play with friends is disheartening, to say the least. I think it's not the most pressing problem we're facing, but children are so innocent, and they're living through this time too. And so I would just try to make space for him to interact with his friends.
That is a wonderful answer. And I want to thank you, especially because you've talked into a screen all day long. And I can't believe you're willing to talk to me on top of that. So thank you so much, Josh. It's been a delight to see you again. And I hope that this passes soon and we get to see each other in person.
Yeah, and thanks for doing this. I've really enjoyed seeing the other interviews you've done. It was good to see Julian, and to hear these other artists that I'm not familiar with, what their perspective is. So thanks, John. I really appreciate it.
All right. Thanks, Josh.
Take care.